What is going on, everybody? It's your boy John, and welcome back to Gearbox. So today we're just going to get right into it. And the reason I say that is we've got a lot to talk about today, and that is, which is better, the WRX or the STI? Let's get into it. Alright, so obviously the argument of WRX versus STI, which one is better, which one's more dailyable, which one's more functionable, so on and so forth, is literally an argument as old as the age of time, as they say. Obviously, I am, slightly biased in some ways, given the fact that I bought a 2019 WRX instead of an STI specifically. And I'll explain that toward the end of the video. But really the first reason you're going to see people choose a WRX over an STI, or one of the reasons, is going to be the idea or the fact that the WRX and the F820 engine is a direct injection motor, as opposed to port injection on the EJ25 in the STI. Both of these motors are going to be very similar. The EJ25 and the STI is going to be a little more beefy, which I think a lot of people would say is nice or better or more beneficial or whatever. Excuse me. But, you know, everyone knows that these motors in the WRXs are not the best. Insert head gasket, ringland failure, whatever, jokes here. But one of the big things you can consider, and obviously people are going to be, kind of fanboys of direct versus port injection. But with direct injection in the WRX, one of the benefits is you're getting a cooler air-fuel mixture into the cylinders where the combustion and ignition happens. So just something to think about. Cooler air and cooler fuel together is more dense, so you can fit more in there. So just something to think about as far as direct versus port injection. A lot of these are going to be things that your everyday person is not necessarily going to know or to care about, but to car guys like myself and to y'all, I would assume it maybe means a little more than most. So that's definitely the first thing to kind of point out is fuel injection. Okie dokie. So next point I want to make, and I already kind of mentioned it, but is the F820 versus the EJ25 platform. So once again, the WRX is a FA20 motor. And then the STI on similar, the same model year, for example, is an EJ25. Really the biggest difference here is just beefier internals. And I know I talked about this a little in the beginning of the video with head gasket failure, ringland failure, etc. Some of these are going to be even more specific, just a beefier bottom end, etc. And all of that is of course due to the fact that the WRX does not make as much horsepower as the STI. I think it is maybe, 20 or 30 horsepower difference, maybe a little more. So not crazy, but obviously the STI being the more sporty version, the WRX that has had a little more TLC put into it. So you're going to expect more horsepower. But from Subaru's point of view, they said, hey, if we're going to use a very similar motor to the WRX, i.e. the FA20, let's go ahead, beefing it up a little bit, get some better internals, and hence the EJ25 was born. So that's definitely something to consider. If you're not going to mess with it or whatever, both cars are probably going to be fine. But if you're looking to maybe push some more power, for example, and really upgrade the turbos and atmospheric blow-off valve and crazy-ass tunes and E85, STI is going to be better suited for it. And it just is what it is. That's what it was built for. So yeah, engine platform, that's always going to be the biggest differentiator between STI and WRX in my opinion. So I would be remiss in my duties to leave it out. All right, so the third thing I want to point out here, and some of you guys might know this and some of you might not, specifically if you are not a WRX and or STI owner, and that's going to be the differentials in the car. So because it is a all-wheel drive car, not a four-wheel drive car, these cars are going to have two diffs. And basically those diffs are going to be able to put the power of the engine through the drivetrain to the wheels, right? Well, because this is an all-wheel drive car, you're also putting power to the front wheels as well. And one of the benefits, I guess you could say, around the STI is that it has driver-controlled, differential power. So basically, what you're doing is you are determining the split of horsepower percentage-wise for the rear versus the front. So let's say, the WRX, and I don't know this, but let's say it's a 65% split to the rear, 35% split to the front. So obviously the majority of the power getting put to the rear. It's a sports car, it makes sense. But you also have the 35% up front if you're in some, bad terrain or snow or whatever. You can make it more balanced. In the STI, you can actually tune that as you're driving and say, actually, I want 75% of the power in the rear and only 25% power in the front. And to be honest with you, that's pretty fucking cool. That's really cool. But ultimately, what I will say is that if you're on the fence between the WRX and the STI and you're thinking, oh my God, this little switch on the differentials is great, well, you're right. But what you also might be missing out on is the fact of how often you're going to use that. If you're daily driving this car and you set it once, you'll probably set it and forget it. If you are taking this puppy on the track and doing it that way, maybe you'll have a little more luck and a little more, I guess, usability from it all. So once again, very cool feature. But it's not something where I chose the STI over the WRX4, so that's something to point out. All right, so really the next thing I want to touch on here is going to be transmission options. Disclaimer, if you are in the market for a WRX or own a WRX and do not own a manual or do not want a manual, I am judging you. Unless it's like a disability or something. But, long story short, both the WRX and the STI come in 6-speed manual transmissions. I forget the name of the transmission. Unfortunately, it is known as the glass transmission because people will just row through gears and fuck them up. Now, if you are one of the slim, percentage of individuals looking to buy a WRX as a automatic, the WRX is your only option. The STI only offers the manual transmission, and that's something to keep in mind. If you're not able, like physically able to drive a manual or something like that, I get it. But I personally think, if you're buying a car like this, where yes, it's a sedan, 4 doors, in my opinion, a family vehicle, a fun family vehicle. But if you, for whatever reason, do not want a manual, you have to go the WRX route. And that's something I think is pretty interesting, especially with, current car companies, especially supercars. Now everyone is shifting to automatic transmissions, dual clutch transmissions for sports cars, supercars, hypercars, etc. Because the shifting is just so much quicker. The human could never beat it. So I do think it's interesting that the STI does not come in a automatic, but it's neither here nor there, but something to definitely consider when you are talking about WRX versus STI. Okie dokie, so really the last thing I want to talk about as it relates to WRX versus STI, and just something to throw out here is, sure, I could talk about price, or I could talk about styling, or this or that. I want to get down to the point of the differences here that really your average Joe is not going to consider. So with that being said, really the last big difference, in my opinion, is going to be the suspension. So once again, WRX is kind of your, not to get confused with the trim, but the base model WRX. And then you have the STI, which is your performance inspired, tuned in multiple different ways WRX. That is going to be the more rally version of the car. And with that is going to come stiffer suspension on the STI versus the WRX. And that's something that can be a double-edged sword, right? If you are looking to daily drive this as your fun family car, or I don't know, you take long road trips and you want to have a good time, a good comfortable ride in a nice big sports sedan, WRX is for you. But once again, similar to a lot of these conversations is, you know, if you're going to daily drive it, but maybe take it on the track every once in a while, or you live in the mountains and want to rip mountain roads, you're probably going to benefit from the stiffer suspension. So that's just, once again, something to keep in mind. You know, obviously, a lot of people will mess with the suspension on their cars, whether it's a WRX or an STI if you're a car guy. But if you're looking for a straight out of the box, from factory, track monster, stiffer suspension type of stuff, STI is probably going to be the way to go, although you will be paying for it. So just keep that in mind. But that's definitely a big point to make, is going to be that stiffer suspension. All right, guys, so, you know, really when it comes to the big differences between the WRX and the STI, those are going to be some of the main points I personally would look out for. Once again, besides price, besides styling, besides all of the superficial stuff, if that makes sense, but really getting down to the nitty-gritty of, you know, performance, handling, you know, power plant, drivetrain, etc. Those in of themselves are going to make the biggest differences in your drivability of the car. So definitely wanted to highlight those as opposed to some of the other points that some people make that are pretty obvious and you know, not all that informative, if you will. But you know, when it comes down to it, the big reason that I chose the WRX over the STI, although price was definitely one of them, I was 19 years old, 20 something. I don't know, shit. Graduated college, and didn't have a whole lot of money, but I knew that I wanted a WRX. So with that being said, the 2019 WRX was a better fit for me price-wise. But the bigger picture of it all is that I knew what I wanted to do with this car, at least in some way, shape, or form. And all of those ways, shapes, and forms revolved around aftermarket parts. So the biggest thing for me was, let me get a base model WRX and customize the absolute piss out of it to my liking. Sure, could I have got an STI, for example, with similar dampening and stiff suspension as I do with my air suspension setup? Sure. Does the STI suspension slam their nuts to the ground when they go into a parking lot? No. Could I have gotten STI with the, you know, always famous STI wing? Sure. Am I a fan of that? No. But that's not really the reason why. You know, you don't have to get a wing on an STI, but I chose the duckbill. Upgraded brakes on the STI? Sure. I went with Faction Fab. You know, so really my goal in a lot of ways was to customize things myself that would essentially upgrade my car to STI spec, if that makes sense. I find joy in doing that. I like making it my own. Factory cars are great, but they're, by nature, they're all the same thing. They're not unique at all. So I wanted to make my car, and maybe spend a little extra money or a little extra time doing that. But in my opinion, that's worth it. So anyway, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video here today. I thought it was a pretty interesting topic, and I know a lot of people talk about this, but I wanted to kind of weigh in on it myself. As always, if you have any comments or any, maybe some beef between STI or WRXs, drop it down below. But as always, give this video a big fat thumbs up, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. You know the drill. Peace.